Okay. Again, these guys are in a hurry because they told me they've got an hour's worth of material. They're going to try and get into 30 minutes. So without further ado, two troublemakers from Israel.
Indeed we are. I'm Inbar, this is Gadi, thank you for not leaving. We're going to talk about APT reports and the evolution of OPSEC and how it actually brought the malware to the stage it is today, which is kind of sort of relating to the last question, or the first question that was just asked. And we also gave it another title. These are not the APT reports you're looking for, because we will articulate that the format is not exactly as it should be. Why are we actually here? For a number of things. We want to simplify the attack process, because you can make it as complicated as you want, but at the end, the consumers need to understand, and they don't come from our background. We want to demonstrate the evolution of various actors over time, as what we claim is a result of their reading APT reports, and we want to suggest some ways to close the gap or maybe make it a little bit better for the good guys.
On that note, I would like to start with a story that will frame the discussion for us. So we all know there is malware out there, nothing new with that. However, one day, the Mandiant report on APT1 came out. I wasn't really shocked. I doubt many people in the room were, but it changed everything. The extent of the exposure, both of the APT threat actor as well as in the media, was insane. More than that, their operations were significantly disrupted. Some say that they disappeared up to a year and a half after they were essentially disclosed to the world. They weren't alone. We have seen, even back then, some other threat actors such as Stuxnet and Flame. There are some interesting things to say about them. For example, Stuxnet was very tight. It was 500K or so. When that disclosure happened, naturally we believe that the threat actor was damaged, but was the damage as big as when Flame was disclosed, which was clearly a scaled operation, with 20 megabytes in it, with their tools, their vulnerabilities. I mean, I'm trying to think about being in a meeting after Flame was disclosed to the world, with all your tools and vulnerabilities just gone like that. That has got to be a very weird meeting when somebody got fired, I'm just saying. So there are different scales to these operations. And we can see actors actually started adapting. For example, you could see Gauss. It was a scaled operation. I believe they had about 2,000 targets that got hit. But also, they had a specific target-specific variant that attacked a specific machine and was encrypted to it. You had to have the right parameters to open it. I'm not aware that it was ever decrypted. Rocket Kitten just used an off-the-shelf implant, Core Impact, because they didn't want to lose their tool set, or at least their first stage, in that particular case, second stage tool set. And Patchwork, well, that was really interesting because we felt kind of deja vu. Everything we watched was code taken and stolen from forums, from GitHub, from all over the place, including their second stage tool set for when the first one is compromised and taken by a researcher. So that was very interesting to watch the evolution of threat actors. Just try to think that you're in that particular meeting and you're talking OPSEC and how to plan these operations before and after.
So OPSEC, operational security in 60 seconds. Why do you actually need OPSEC? OPSEC is something you do for 3 reasons. Comes from the Army. In the Army, everything is in 3s. First, you want to assure success. You've gone through all that trouble of creating a plan, creating tools. You want it to succeed. You don't want to fail. You want to make sure that you're not detected, because detection shortens your available time on the target. It has repercussions. Maybe you have to change tools. Maybe you have to abandon the target altogether. And you want to prevent attribution. Now, nowadays, as you've just heard, this is not so much a problem as it used to be, because there are ways to bypass that. But originally, this is what you do in order to prevent the attribution. And you can compare that to normal processes that are not APT involved. For example, the software development cycle or risk assessment, risk management. It's the things that you do to make sure that stuff goes well, doesn't break down, and everything is in order. Now, when would you actually compromise the OPSEC? And these are the reasons that malware actually gets caught, and then we all read about it. So first of all, you have the time to market. To develop a new tool from scratch, to find vulnerabilities, to write tools, to evade all the detection mechanisms, that takes time. And sometimes you don't have that time, so you make compromises. Scalability. If you have a lot of targets, you would want to have a different tool for each one, so in case Kaspersky catches one of the samples, you don't have the whole tool chain coming down. But you can't do that, because if you have many targets, you can't develop different tools. You make compromises. And the ease of deployment. Sometimes delivering the malware is a big operation. Stuxnet was a huge thing. We don't exactly know what happened there, and theories goes as far as people came in through USB drives or used drones or whatever, and sometimes you can't do that. Interesting. I didn't even know that worked. So, back to where we were. Apologize for that. So generally speaking, every APT report that you guys read or write is the result of some failure, some OPSEC failure that created the problem.
So, continuing from this point, we have one case, maybe there are others we're not aware of, where we can actually look behind the scenes and see what the attacker is thinking. That is, in this particular case, hacking team. And as you can read here, the font isn't very big. The Citizen Lab report quoted an email that said, their primary concern seems to have been not getting caught again. Just imagine for a second the economic cost of not being able to continue your operations for a year and a half. Stuxnet had code in it that was 12 years old. Imagine running, let's say, 2,500 operations a year for 12 years with this code, or parts of it, and all of a sudden, all these different operations and targets are gone, and you can't keep working for about a year and a half, not to mention the 0 days and everything around that.
By the way, there's a recent example with the NSO tool that got caught, and all of a sudden, you lose a lot of infrastructure, you lose vulnerabilities that you're exploiting. There's a huge cost of being caught. So we reached the conclusion that as a consumer of APT reports, most of them actually quite suck. And there are a few reasons. The first one, and this is something that we've been saying for a while now, this whole agenda has been going on for over a year. Sometimes, as a malware researcher, you feel like something in the spirit of a sports commentator. Why? Because you stand on this stage and you talk about how good the other guy is, right? And it's not exactly what we think we want to see in APT reports. They're very long. This was also mentioned in the previous talk. Some of them are 60 pages long. If you're an IT security guy or some other security professional at a company, can you really read 60 pages every time? And is all that content relevant to you? A lot of it, as we've just heard, is for PR reasons. Companies have public versions of documents and they have customer-only versions, and the ones that go out sometimes are more aimed at PR and building the reputation of a company.
Not to mention also writing for ourselves. What will other researchers think as opposed to the actual target audience of the report?
Yeah. And as a result, there's an asymmetry that's being created. Get it? Okay, you don't get it? Get it? So there's an asymmetry between the benefit that the attacker takes from these APT reports and the benefit of the defender or the actual consumer. And then the attackers are like, oh, really? This is interesting, all that stuff that you've discovered. Tell us more about your abilities. But the problem is that it's not just the actor that has been caught. Everybody else is reading the same report and drawing their own conclusions. What did the other guy do wrong that we can not repeat next time, right? The APT report, APT1 report, kind of made a shift for everybody else.
Essentially, it's like having free QA when you do APT reports. And we can look at some lessons learned over time from APT1 when they had a very simple CNC server. I don't even remember, was it an IRC? I don't think it was IRC. But anyway, a very simplistic CNC server, all the way to Turla with satellite traffic hijacking, which was kind of interesting. There is learning in progress. So code sharing. Stuxnet, Duku, Flame had some code sharing in there. And then you never know. Iron Tiger, for example, we're sorry for throwing names of, and name conventions, everything is kind of confusing, but Just go with us on this. If you don't recognize a few of them, that's fine. Iron Tiger was clearly Chinese, or was it? Corretto, Damask. Everything fits so well. We're so sure who it was. Was it maybe a false flag? Duku 2, there are so many false flags in there. We're not really going to go into this too much because the entire talk before us talked exactly about this issue, which was amazing for us to really drill down on that. But do you really ever know? So you read an APT report. Amazing. What do you get out of it if you're the actual consumer? First of all, a lot of malware analysis. The amount of IDA screenshots you get per report is really important. I love those. Then you get some IOCs. Some command and control setup sometimes, maybe. Attack vectors, a little bit. And the actual attacker objective, motivation, and what we know about their intelligence apparatus.
And the graph is inverse here, because on the left, it's the stuff that is least useful, and on the right is the stuff that's most useful, but you get the least of it.
So considering this is the usual distribution in APT reports of information that's useful to us, why do we keep writing them the same way? Do we just have this information, or do we choose to write it this way? So what we want to get into is what we call the engagement process. Essentially, when we look at the various investigations and APT reports, there is a lot of effort that goes into reverse engineering the samples, what's going on with them, and that's fine. Let's do forensics. What we are interested in is re-engineering how the attackers actually work, so that we can understand what their methodologies are, create a simplified model we can learn and grow with. And we call this the engagement process.
So we're going to start by looking at the attacker side, right? Because every attacker is like a hacker with the hoodie thing. First thing, you have to compose your intelligence requirement. This is your shopping list. As an attacker, what is it that you're after? Then the second thing is, okay, sorry, we have some examples. Gadi, that's your.
Okay, I'll do this one. So, if you want to compose your intelligence requirements, it's kind of very simple. You ask some questions. For example, does Saddam Hussein have WMDs? I think it's far enough in history that people are not too attached to the subject, so that's why we chose it. Where are the WMDs? Does he intend to use the WMDs? Who is working on the WMDs? Can we get Matt Damon back? Some people got the joke this time. That's pretty cool. So the second stage, after we know what we're looking for, is where can I find these answers, or who holds the information I need? So for example, we can talk about some verticals, such as banking or aerospace. And we can talk about specific targets, such as Gadi has the information that you would want.
The third stage is the intelligence gathering. This is all information that you gather before you attack. And by that, you make a decision on how to choose your tools, choose your way. Doing that gives you the target report. This is the document. This is a little bit of military drill. I don't know the word for that. But yeah, Jaron. This is what we do in the Army. Now you have a target report. That has all the information that you need in order to make a decision on how to do it. And then you make the attack plan. The attack plan consists of two parts. The first part is how you do things. The plan, we're going to come through here, and there's going to be another effort. And the second part is what is the tool that we're going to use? What are the weapons that we are going to use? These are decisions made based on the target report. For example, the family of Stuxnet, Duku, Flame, and Gauss, they all carried some very particular weapons for some very particular targets, whereas in the case of one of the attacks that Dell reported, the attackers were using the already installed, what was it, the management system?
It's an orchestration or provisioning system, yeah.
Yeah, so they use an existing tool that was installed at the target to proliferate. So you choose your weapons based on the target. And that doesn't end, because once you attack, you only have one system. And that is usually the weakest link. And from there, you have to proliferate. You have to move on to the other computers, lateral movement. So now it all repeats. I've gotten hold of the first computer. Now I want to move to the next one. So once again, I have to collect intelligence. I have to draw the target map, and I have to decide what to do. Now, the problem is that right now, we're no longer outside. We're already inside the destination.
So it used to be that when you do OPSEC, you were worried about very simple things. What are the controls my target has? Do they have an antivirus, for example? With evolution, they started caring about what are the back-end capabilities the vendor has, for example, Kaspersky KSN. What could they do to us later on, regardless of what's installed on the system? And more recently, let's look for other players. Regin, for example, if you read the report, there was a term there that was called APT magnet. I'm not going to tell the Kaspersky story, but essentially, hey, if this machine is infected with so many APTs, we wonder what else is on there. Now we have to take care of the OPSEC of the opponent. What are they doing wrong that could potentially make us vulnerable to detection? You really, really need to try to hide your identity right now, or, as we'll see, change your strategy completely and not care.
So in one of the examples of a campaign, the attacker was acting on the target. The target had incident response teams by CrowdStrike that showed up. And once the attacker noted that somebody else was there looking at them, they disappeared. And we heard a similar example in the previous talk. Compilation times, which was also mentioned in the previous talk, when you look at the difference between the compilation time and the infection time, that reveals information. It tells you what the ability of the attacker is from the moment of creating the malware to delivering it. And in the case of Stuxnet, we're talking about some very guarded facilities. And it tells a lot about your ability to close that gap in such a short time. Some other examples. Some groups, whenever possible, use tools that are installed on the computer. That way you don't need to develop your own. They cannot be blacklisted. They will always be there.
I mean, we all see, the more the time moves on, the more this PowerShell is being used. I mean, that's one of the key, I guess, TTPs for most threat actors out there nowadays.
And Dooku 2 was an interesting example because they actually were so confident in their ability to control the network that only a bunch of, or like a small bunch of computers actually had code installed on them. The rest of the computers were just running stuff in memory because they were so confident. And you see how we're moving forward in, there's an evolution in the OPSEC of the attacker.
One of the interesting things that we found in our research that is rarely mentioned whenever people talk about various types of kill chain buzzwords is the fold retreat stage. For example, Red October, it took them a while, and you can talk to Costi and somebody from the great team about this, to dismantle their infrastructure. With the mask though, Corretto, within 4 hours writing a blog post just said the mask, they were gone. Our supposition, this is a story, we can prove it, is with Dooku 2, they didn't wait for a publication, they hunted the vendor down. That is how we see the evolution of, essentially, the threat actors. And as counterexamples, people who just don't care if they have been discovered, if they even look for that, are APT12 and Gaza hacker team, although I have to admit I haven't really followed up on them the past 6 or 8 months, so they could have changed.
So now,
you do this one.
okay. Now we switch over to the defender side. So we've shown the different stages and how the attacker thinks. Now let's talk about the defender side. And here, we're actually trying to answer some of the problems that our previous speakers mentioned. We're going to show the problem in the existing situation, what the takeaways are, and what we recommend that the defenders or the consumers of the APT reports do. Stage 1, we said compose intelligence requirement. There's not enough information on attacker objectives. Not enough. Because attacker objectives are what information was actually stolen, and many times that is not something that people disclose. So as a result, you have to understand that it's like having a stalker. They really like you. It's not going to end just once. There's this example, there was an attack, and then there was an intervention.
This
the
is
attacker was
a
shut
slide
down.
from Dell SecureWorks Phil Burdett at RSA 2014 for the credit.
And then a few days later, the attacker returns. Okay? Now, stealing data is just one of the options. Now, everyone who's been working with malware knows that basically once there's a malware in your computer, you can do whatever you want. But all the stuff that gets published is mostly data theft. So it's building this understanding in the customer's head that that's what I'm worried about, if someone steals my data. But as the Sony case showed us, sometimes it goes to different directions. They erased a lot of data. We had the attack on the Saudi oil rigs. It's not always about stealing information. You can also change it.
So this is where we'd like to talk about an action. Perform a meaningful risk assessment. Risk assessments used to be this book that you would throw around after spending a lot of time creating for compliance. If you take into account, hey, this Trojan horse can spy, that means it can also destroy, the risk assessment can be meaningful for your daily operations. Compile a target list, the second stage. There is no time-sensitive information out there, in many cases, which means we can't really distinguish a pattern. If you have similar platforms, similar data, you're on the list. If you see Target getting owned, start thinking, they own those systems, do I have those systems? And here is where you can perform, for example, a threat assessment. This is something actually happening in the world. Don't wait. Make sure operationally you understand this could happen to you now. It's no longer a risk.
Now we come to the inside the organization stage, right? And here, there's a pre-engagement stage and an engagement stage. At the pre-engagement, there is a lot of publicly available data. There is a lot I can discover about my objective, about my target, just by scanning the internet. Stuff gets scanned, it gets indexed, it gets posted, and you don't pay attention. And there's a lot there that can be used by an attacker. There's lax security awareness that allows probing, and by that I mean, for example, people making phone calls and just asking some questions and getting answers, or maybe doing some port scanning, and no one cares about port scanning because you're saying, oh, it's just port scanning, whatever. It's not really an attack. But the attacker gets all that information. And the takeaway is that the attacker can gain a lot before actually getting to you. So what you need to do is limit public information. And it's easier said than done. But whenever possible, don't put organograms. Try not to give away all sorts of email addresses and stuff that can be used against you. You want to act outside your perimeter. This is something we've been talking about also. Don't wait for them to come to you. There are companies that deal with that. They do intelligence research. They will try to find signs that the attackers are on their way to you before they actually come. If you can find this intel provider, use them. And this has to be periodically refreshed. Because just like any other thing that is annoying, and security is annoying, and safety is annoying, only when something bad happens, then people get aware. And then for a while, they remember not to connect unknown USB devices and not to click on emails. But every now and then, you know, nothing happens, and then all of a sudden, everybody forgets that. So you have to go through that again and again. And it seems obvious, but it's not. Okay? We work in this area, but most people that read the reports, they are not. They're not researchers. There are people whose job is to make an organization secure, usually understaffed, under-budgeted. So what is obvious to us is not necessarily obvious to them. In the engagement stage, there's not many people or organizations share the lateral movement stage. I don't know why. Whether they think it's not interesting because it's the same malware, so what difference does it make? Or maybe the way that the lateral movement was done exposes vulnerabilities or some bad things that you do or didn't do, right? So there's not enough information. And the takeaway is the engagement cycle is not a one-time thing. It takes a while, okay? Because they will infiltrate in the weakest link, and from there, they will move on, because usually they're after some information on a computer that is hopefully not publicly accessible. And that means that you have a number of opportunities to interfere with that. It's not a one-time thing that if you missed it, it's over. No, it's not like that. So what can you do? You need to put as many obstacles as possible, layered security. Gadi can tell you all about deception. Put rocks on the road of the attacker. Make them have to deal with them, buy time to give you response time. And don't be shy. Share whatever you can. Because the attackers learn from our analysis of their tools. We need to learn from the analysis of their methods, okay? We need to learn on our side as well.
So we're going to run through the end, because essentially we're starting to get to conclusions. This is really important to us personally. One of the understandings we have about the field changing, the industry changing. The attackers can obviously destroy forensic evidence. and they do. Snapshots and logs can save the day, but the twist is it's no longer just about monitoring or sending it to the SIEM or SOC, but backing up the data can be as important, if not more important. When forensic comes in, the way for us to speak about this in a way is that effectively, whether this needs to happen or not, a lot of our security is in incident response. That's our biggest control, or should be, or is in many cases. If we do not have these logs, this information backed up, that is very bad. So for us, Inbar came up with this term, I'm going to throw this at him, create a backup response plan, or as we like to call it, BURP. Now try this at home. Our purpose here was just to take you through it, but if you have an APT report, you're creating one, or you're trying to use one for the intelligence at your organization, go through this. How much information that's relevant do you have there? And go through the engagement process and try to see how can I use this with my defenses, as opposed to just taking the IOCs, copy-pasting them. And whoever here puts in IOCs and reports as a picture, thank you very much, please stop. But just saying, try going through this process yourself. Help us fight back. Demand better APT reports from your vendor.
So there's a problem that we call the decline of shame, and it has a lot to do with what the previous talk was about, the attribution. At the beginning, before we started attributing and actually detecting stuff, then people were really, really careful. They went out of their way not to be detected. But then we started catching them, and we started outing them, and all of a sudden it's a known secret. Everybody's attacking everybody, and no one cares about being caught. And it's true to some particular actors, to the extent that sometimes they won't bother hiding the tools, or sometimes the agenda is so obvious that they just don't care, okay? And this is also partly because of the way we're dealing with that. So what we would like to see, better, more actionable APT reports, also mentioned before, earlier breach report, give us the heads up, let other people know something is going on so they can raise their defenses, and actionable public information sharing, and enough with the attribution addiction. Thanks, guys, for the previous talk.
And essentially, the previous talk talked a lot about attribution. There are 2 points we would like to make here, to emphasize here. Number one, no more attribution based on IP addresses. Please, it's a complex subject. You just heard 30 minutes on that. Number two, yes, I understand why attribution can be important to some, but think about all the resources you put into it that you could have put into defense or research. How does it actually help you? That's, by the way, a heads up to Dave Marcus about the attribution. Whenever I speak about attribution, I mention him. And his final words, number one, APT reports can be a huge help. We have seen how threat actors evolve. Let's evolve too. Let's stay under 6. Yes, we are their QA, but if they have to keep changing, if we can increase their economic cost for operations, that is significant. Let's keep doing it. Let's just change our focus slightly. That's pretty much it. And with that, we would like to thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
I don't know if we have time for questions because there's a break, but since there's a break, you can just come and ask us.
Yeah, I think we'll take one question before lunch.
Right, go ahead.
Anyone got a pressing question? No? Really?
Everybody
Okay.
wants to go to lunch.
In that case, I think we should give Inbar a hand.
Right on.